Taking action. Speaker Boehner sets the course in the House with its growing GOP majority.
My job is listen to my members and listen to the American people and make their priorities our priorities.
Scars healing. Pope Francis consoles the mother of a murdered Argentinian dissident. And delayed recognition. The Medal of Honor is bestowed on an officer more than 150 years after his death. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, November 6th, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. House Speaker John Boehner is getting right down to business tonight, armed with a swelling GOP majority. Wyatt Goolsbee covered his briefing today and reports from Capitol Hill tonight. Wyatt?
Yes, Brian, today House Speaker John Boehner came out swinging against President Obama and his policies. He says come January, the Republican-controlled Congress will move to act on adopting a number of bills he says were held up by Senate Democrats in the past. The Ohio Republican had plenty to say in his first news conference here in Washington since Tuesday's election. He says they will act to approve the Keystone Pipeline, make changes to the health care law, and encourage businesses to hire more veterans. But on the topic of immigration reform, Boehner didn't hold back, warning President Obama not to act alone in changing immigration laws.
I believe that if the president continues to act on his own, he is going to poison the well. When you play with matches, you take the risk of burning yourself. And he's going to burn himself if he continues to go down this path.
While Boehner was critical towards President Obama and Senate Democrats, he says there are bipartisan issues they can work together on, including trade agreements and a tax code overhaul. John Samples with the Cato Institute here in Washington says those bipartisan efforts might work, but he says it won't be easy for Boehner to pass the full agenda he wants.
Both of these parties are pretty far apart on most issues. There could be a few things that might be done. There's parts of Obamacare that have proven to be unpopular, so we might see some of that, but that's fairly technical stuff and fairly limited. So my expectation would be that we're not going to see much in the way of legislating and the signing of laws in the next 2 years.
Now, both Speaker Boehner as well as Senator Mitch McConnell, who is expected to be the majority leader, will meet with President Obama at the White House tomorrow. It's their first face-to-face meeting since Tuesday's elections. Brian?
All right, on Capitol Hill, Wyatt Goolsbee in the rain in front of the facelift that the Capitol is getting tonight. And before this new Congress is sworn in, there is still time left for the current Congress to act. Chief White House Correspondent Susanne LaFrankie talks about that with Washington Examiner political correspondent Rebecca Berg.
Rebecca, what do you see the Republicans doing with this momentum that they got from the win just the other day?
Well, in the next few months when Democrats are still in control of the Senate, I think Republicans will demand that they don't do anything too big. Don't require votes on appointments. Just do the bare minimum to keep the government running, because the Americans have passed down this mandate to Republicans to govern. But once Republicans take the reign in Congress, I think we're going to see rapid fire, a lot of work being done on corporate tax reform, on trade, and of course on Obamacare. They have said they will repeal the whole law. The president will likely veto that, but they will also be working on smaller parts of the bill as well.
What do you think that they can agree on? The president mentioned a few things, minimum wage, he mentioned trade. What do you think they can agree on?
I think tax reform will be one of the areas where the parties do come together and actually try to find a compromise. This is an important economic issue that both parties have been looking at, and this could be a ripe area for common ground.
And what do you, if you were a fly on the wall tomorrow when they meet in the White House, both the bipartisan leadership from the House and Senate with the Obama administration, what do you anticipate will happen at that meeting?
I imagine there will be some tension in the room, but Republicans have indicated they do want to come to Congress to work. They want to find areas for compromise with Democrats. And this is very important, of course, looking ahead when you look at the party's overall brand, because Americans have given Republicans this mandate to govern. If they don't govern, that will be held against them in the future.
So they have to be careful going into 2016.
Absolutely. If this Republican Congress takes power and doesn't do anything or makes any big mistakes, the American people will hold that against them moving forward, and Democrats will certainly hold that to them as well.
What do you think of 2016? Just a quick snapshot of what you anticipate.
Well, the Republicans have a strong field, and it's already fleshing out. A number of those potential candidates are senators, and so we'll be very engaged in all of these upcoming negotiations on Capitol Hill. But Hillary Clinton, obviously, also making moves.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for being with us.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
And now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. A federal appeals court in Cincinnati has upheld 4 state bans on so-called same-sex marriage. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled 2-1 in favor of these state laws. The court was reviewing cases from Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, and Tennessee. So the decision today means there is now a divide between different federal appeals courts. That increases the chances the U.S. Supreme Court will take up this issue. Pope Francis has excommunicated an Argentine priest who was found guilty of being a pedophile. The announcement was made Wednesday by the local diocese. Jose Marceau was sentenced to 14 years in prison in 2011 after admitting to sexually abusing 4 teens. The Archdiocese of Chicago releases internal files on 36 abusive priests. This fulfills a pledge from Cardinal Francis George to do so before he retires. The records cover more than 350 incidents since 1952. Victims groups have criticized the Archdiocese for concealing clergy sex abuse. News Nightly asked the Archdiocese why make the cases public now.
We can't change what's happened in the past, but we certainly can try to rebuild the trust in our church. And I think through open and honest dialogue such as this, and communication with people at large, and work with victims as well as all those people who are sitting faithfully in our churches, that we can continue to move forward and we will restore the credibility of this church.
Cardinal George retires November 18th. He is succeeded by Archbishop-designate Blaise Joseph Supich. He comes from the Diocese of Spokane, Washington. Philadelphia police are crediting an abducted woman's fighting spirit with saving her life. 22-year-old Carlesha Freeland-Gaither is resting safely at home tonight after being held captive 3 days in the back of a car. Police arrested a suspect, 37-year-old Delvin Barnes, in Maryland last night.
I've been on the job 46 years. First time I've ever seen a kidnapping actually on videotape, which really was horrific to watch it unfold. We're very fortunate that we were able to recover her and apprehend the offender.
The abduction Sunday night, just blocks from the victim's Philadelphia home, was caught by a security camera. Barnes was surrounded by police in Maryland and arrested with no fight late last night. Police say tips from the public and good police work helped lead them to that suspect. Amber Vinson says she still doesn't know how she contracted Ebola. The Dallas nurse who flew on a plane before being diagnosed talked about that with CNN.
I followed the CDC protocol for donning and doffing every time. I never strayed. I had no symptoms. There was no way. At that time, I could not transmit it. So the science of it, no symptoms, you can't transmit it. So getting on that plane was just like whoever sat next to me getting on a plane. They had no symptoms either, you know? So I would not, it's never my goal or intention to bring harm to anyone.
Vinson and her friend and fellow nurse, Nina Pham, were infected with Ebola after caring for Thomas Eric Duncan. He was the first Ebola patient treated in the U.S. He later died. Vinson and Pham have since recovered from the illness. The U.S. Army is opening an Ebola treatment outpost in Liberia. It is specifically for medical workers infected while caring for patients. It's located just outside Monrovia and opens this weekend. The Army hopes it will be an incentive for healthcare workers to keep caring for Ebola patients. Top Interpol officials tell the Associated Press potential jihad fighters could cruise their way into battle because normal land and air routes are being closely watched. Some extremists are taking cruise ships into that region to avoid being tracked. Turkey has tightened its land borders to stop would-be jihadi fighters from entering battle zones in Syria and Iraq. Interpol is expanding monitoring to include cruise lines, banks, and hotels. Officials at Interpol say this new travel phenomenon is a fairly recent development within the past few months. The group behind the annual March for Life was in court today here in Washington. March for Life is fighting the federal mandate that all employers cover birth control and abortion-inducing drugs in their insurance plans. Jason Calvi is here now with that story.
Brian, I was in court as the March for Life faced off against the Obama administration. It's different from the other lawsuits brought on by Hobby Lobby and various other groups that total about 100 lawsuits. Those cases are based on religious objections to providing birth control and abortion-inducing drugs. Now, the March for Life is a secular organization with no official religious creed. Therefore, they don't qualify for the religious employer exemptions to the mandate. The Christian law firm Alliance Defending Freedom represented them today, asking the judge to give the march an exemption from the mandate. The president of the March for Life says they were forced into suing to stay true to their mission.
The reason that we exist is to defend life from conception. So this mandate by the government is forcing us to violate the very reason that the March for Life was founded and exists.
The government says the March for Life doesn't have standing. That is the right to sue. It says they shouldn't be given an exemption because it would throw a wrench into the new health care law. The government lawyer said the March for Life may be opposed to birth control, but they still have to pay for it, just like an anti-tax group still has to pay taxes. The judge says it's a complicated issue and may take a few months for him to issue a decision. Brian?
Complicated indeed. Thank you, Jason. Pope Francis meets with bishops for the first time since his Vatican summit on the family last month. The Holy Father received bishops from Malawi today at the Vatican. They're in Rome on pilgrimage. Pope Francis focused on the family during his remarks. He also expressed concern for victims of HIV/AIDS. According to the United Nations, about 10% of the population is HIV positive or has AIDS. The first Catholic diocese in the U.S. celebrates a special anniversary today. It was 225 years ago today. Pope Pius VI established the Baltimore Diocese. At that time, it included all 13 original colonies. John Carroll, a Maryland native, was named the diocese's first bishop. That makes him the first American bishop and archbishop. Archbishop William Laurie, Cardinal Sean O'Malley, and Archbishop Charles Chaput celebrated the anniversary Mass this past Sunday. Coming up, a Baptist author makes the case for Catholic saints among Protestants. Indifference towards those in need is not acceptable for a Christian. That's the latest tweet from the Twitter account of Pope Francis. Thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly on Thursday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. And on the First World War's 100th anniversary, Britain holds a series of events honoring those lost in the war to end all wars. Queen Elizabeth II laid a poppy wreath during a ceremony opening the Flanders Memorial Garden in London today. Soil from Belgium's Flanders Field and other World War I battlefields and cemeteries was placed in the garden. Prince Harry paid his respects to the fallen and other veterans at an event on the grounds of Westminster Abbey's Field of Remembrance. Well, it took more than 150 years, but today the nation awarded its top military honor, the Medal of Honor, to a Civil War hero. President Obama conducted the ceremony for First Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing. He died on the Gettysburg battlefield in Pennsylvania in 1863. He was just 22. Relatives and descendants of Lieutenant Cushing accepted the award on his behalf. He stood his ground, leading troops into a battle while bleeding profusely as thousands of Confederate soldiers advanced on Union troops. The president explained that some stories are lost over time, but it's never too late to honor those who sacrificed all.
151 years ago, as our country struggled for its survival, President Lincoln dedicated the battlefield at Gettysburg as a final resting place for those who died here, that the nation might live.
Recommendations for the Congressional Medal of Honor normally must be made within 2 years of the act of heroism. Congress granted an exemption for today's special ceremony. It was a happy gathering in the Vatican for a family from Argentina still recovering from a painful chapter in that country's history. Pope Francis met with Estela de Gallardo and nearly 20 members of her family. She is president of the human rights group Grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo. They represent the mothers of political dissidents kidnapped and killed by Argentina's military dictatorship in the 70s and early 80s. Her grandson, one of the thousands of children stolen during that time, joined her at the meeting with the Pope today. It was very moving. His mother, Estella's daughter, was executed in 1978, and the boy was put up for adoption. In October, 15 officials were sentenced to life in prison in connection with her death and the death of dozens of others. Reaching out to people of all faiths has been a hallmark of the papacy of Pope Francis. Today, he extended a hand to evangelicals. The Holy Father met with a delegation from the World Evangelical Alliance. That's a network of evangelical churches in more than 100 countries around the world. At the Vatican today, Francis acknowledged the divisions among Christians, but he emphasized baptism as a common ground. The Pope said Catholics and evangelicals have much to learn from one another. Jonathan Merritt is the author of Jesus is Better Than You Imagined. He joins us via Skype from New York. You also wrote an article about saints and what Protestants might learn from the saints. What got you digging into the saints, exploring their lives?
Well, you know, as a Protestant, somebody who served in a Protestant church and is now a religion columnist, I've always been interested in saints. But growing up, I was taught that recognizing the saints was tantamount to idolatry. And what little I knew about Catholicism and sainthood, I thought, well, this doesn't seem to be true at all. So as a journalist, my curiosity got the better of me. I began researching the matter and found that what many Protestants believe about sainthood and the way that Catholics interact with sainthood is actually fictitious. And instead, surprising to me as a Protestant, there were many benefits to having a knowledge of and even a theology of saints that I think we Protestants miss out on.
So apparently the lives of the saints, as you began to explore them, aren't what you expected.
They weren't at all what I expect them to be. Often you think of the word saint, you think of it as a synonym for perfection. But when you read church history, you find most saints were anything but saintly in this definition, especially in their early years. They're stubborn and angry, impatient, and sometimes discouraged by turns. So these people, I found, didn't fit this mold at all. They are just as imperfect as we are. And in that sense, I think we find saints to be far more accessible than many people from the outside looking in often assume they'll be.
Well, many of us have our favorite saints. I look to St. Joseph, the foster father of Jesus. Also St. John Paul II, who I watched throughout my life, especially my professional career. What saint really grabbed you?
Well, I think my favorite saint is probably St. Francis. And I don't mean the future St. Francis, who's the current pope, but the St. Francis who lived many, many years ago in Italy, somebody who gave away all of his possessions and walked barefoot, who kissed lepers and cared for those in need, who chose to live a life of poverty. I think he was interesting because when you research history, you find he was known throughout Italy as pazzo, or madman. And he was so eccentric for Jesus that I think he whispers to us through history and says, it's okay if you're a little crazy for God.
So what would you say to your brothers and sisters who are not Catholic about your journey with the saints and how they might benefit from it?
Well, I would say open your eyes, your ears, and your hearts to what saints can teach you. I think they are, at the very least, reminders to us that if we follow Jesus, we'll be, in the words of Flannery O'Connor, she said, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you strange. Or as the Apostle Paul said, our dedication to Christ will make us look like fools. Christians have made these people saints so we won't forget them, so their stories will echo for generations and be an ongoing light shined on the paths of those who walk before us, to be examples. And so I think saints have many things to teach us if we can put aside the fictitious things, the caricatures about saints that our traditions may have taught us, and instead embrace what the church historically has said about saints. I think they'll be a great encouragement to any of us who claim the name of Jesus Christ.
Well, how refreshing. Jonathan Merritt, thanks for joining us, the author of Jesus is Better Than You Imagined. We appreciate the time you spent with us.
My pleasure.
Up next, Queen Elizabeth II helps open Flanders Memorial Garden in London, commemorating those who died in World War I. On Thursday, the 6th of November, this is EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for being with us. The Postal Service unveils its Christmas stamp today and says it's ready for the coming holiday season. This year's holiday stamp features Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. The Postal Service announced today that 7-day holiday mail delivery begins November 17th in major cities, and the Postmaster General says his carriers are ready for the rush. Well, the U.S. government pays a $400,000 settlement to a Sikh woman as compensation for violating her right to religious freedom. The case, Tagore versus the Department of Homeland Security, started nearly 10 years ago. Kaval Tagore was turned away from the IRS building where she worked for carrying the kirpan. This is a ceremonial knife, one of 5 articles of faithful Sikhs carry with them. Tagore won her legal battle. He now has a clean employment record. The government has since dropped its ban on the kirpan in federal buildings. Joining us from Houston by Skype, Kaval Tagore and her attorney, Scott Noir. They're in Houston. And Scott, this settlement that allows Sikhs to wear a religious article going into federal buildings, is this a victory for all Sikhs, for all religions, as a matter of fact?
The settlement itself applies only to Ms. Tagore. However, the settlement embodies a principle that the United States government had not agreed to before this litigation. And that principle is that the kirpan is not merely what the government termed it a dangerous weapon, quote unquote, but actually a religious article that is entitled to religious accommodation in federal buildings. The federal government had tried to keep it out. Now it gets to come in.
Kaval, what does this kirpan mean to you and members of your faith?
See, there are 5 articles of faith that when a Sikh goes through initiation process, after that it becomes mandatory for an Amritdhari Sikh, which basically means an initiated Sikh that that wears those 5 articles of faith on them all the time, and one of them is kirpan. Kirpan, basically, it's 2 words if you were to break it down, which is kirpa and an. And kirpa basically means grace or an act of kindness, and an basically means dignity or honor. So to me, it signifies that I should be always helping the weak and the meek and promoting justice for all. That's what kirpan to me signifies.
And so what did it mean to you to have this case go in your favor, that you are now able to work in federal buildings, you're reinstated, you can do this and wear this article?
Actually, I have not been reinstated. I'll have to apply for the federal jobs again and try and secure a new job. But it is a huge victory for myself, and I know for other Sikhs as well. There are a lot of Sikhs that have been getting calls from that are in various federal buildings or federal employees that are looking very favorably now that they're able to, there is something in place now where Sikhs don't have to compromise or don't have to choose between practicing the religion or working for federal government.
All right, Scott, now because this has now been gone in your favor, do you see a shift here with the security at federal buildings being forced to learn a little bit about the Sikh religion and honor this article of their faith?
Absolutely. The agreement does have a provision in it for the training of the federal guards who will be now forced to understand and to accommodate the kirpan. We view that as a significant victory. The FPS, the Federal Protective Service, is going to publish on its website its policy that came about as a result of this lawsuit, which is a full policy that creates what are called exceptions and exemptions for Sikhs and other religions who want to enter federal buildings with so-called dangerous weapons. There now has to be some accommodation given to all those articles of faith.
All right, Scott Noir and Kaval Tagore, we appreciate both of you joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we appreciate all of you being with us tonight as well. Until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch anytime you like on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thank you for watching tonight. Good night and God bless you.